Hi folks, it's Professor Michael Tafel. I'm back in Florence, Italy, and I'm here to study the politics of the Florentine Republic. Now right now in America, we're going through an election year. People are talking about how polarizing the politics are. The political parties hate each other and things like that. So I thought it would be interesting to come back here to Florence and take a deeper look into Florentine politics during the era of the Republic. We come to about the 1300s in Florence, there are two more developed political parties that emerge, the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. So let me start off with just a real quick history here. After the fall of Rome, Western Europe went through what we often call the quote-unquote Dark Ages. But many different tribes came in, smaller little kingdoms start popping up, and what used to be a unified place is now a patchwork of many different kingdoms and principalities and city-states and that sort of thing. In Central Europe and in Northern Italy, we have a political entity emerging that's called the Holy Roman Empire. In Rome, you have the Pope, and in Northern Europe, mostly what we call Germany today, you have where the Holy Roman Emperor presides. And as Northern Italy started emerging out of the quote-unquote Dark Ages, and a lot of these tiny little cities became very, very wealthy, you start to see political factions emerge. Some groups support the power of the Pope over the power of the emperor. Other groups look to the emperor as the natural leader of Italy. Now, on first glance, it sounds simple. Oh, the party of the Pope, the party of the emperor. But it's not so simple. And something that began to emerge in intellectual circles and things like that was this kind of debate, often called the investiture controversy. Who has more power? Is it the Pope, who's the vicar of Christ on earth, or is it the emperor who has the raw power? So originally for this documentary, what I wanted to do was I wanted to research the identities behind these political factions. How much did it really matter to somebody to be a Guelph or a Ghibelline? Was it just to be part of a particular club? Was it just an avenue towards power? I also want to research how these political factions could be used to kind of demonize the other per se, to make us get whipped up against that other side to the point where they're not even human anymore. And in the case of Florence, to the point where we can start fighting with each other and even killing each other. So if we go back to roughly around the year 1000, you start to see two different types of interests in the cities. You have the feudal lords that might own large chunks of land out in the countryside that have also set up shop in the cities. They have special titles that they can pass down through inheritance. Then you also start to have what we can generically call the new money interest. Things like the bankers, the merchant class, folks like that. So these two groups tend to start having conflicts with each other. But it gets even deeper than that, because amongst the noble families, they have their own factions, just as the various banking families have their own factions and their own conflicts with each other. However, you can begin to generalize a little bit about nobles, people with inherited titles, who start to look more towards the emperor as the proper leader of Italy, and the new money in the cities, the merchant classes as well as the banking classes, that begin to look more towards the Pope. But it is important to note that within Guelph politics, it's not just about the Pope, it's also about the King of France. But French interests are also seen as a way of kind of pushing a wedge between the emperor's power. You have the emperor who comes from the lands of Germany, and then to the left of that is France. So the Holy Roman Emperor believes that they have the legitimate right to rule over Italy. The kings of France also at one time had a loose claim to kind of Charlemagne's legacy. He was the original Holy Roman Emperor. And often the kings of France are brought in to kind of help with the Pope's cause, to kind of limit the power of the emperor. It is important to note, though, that although both sides claim they are right, they are both looking to bring in outside forces to interfere in their city's politics. While this is going on around the 1200s, there's also a revolution going on in the university system throughout Western Europe. Especially in places like Northern Italy and France and some of the German towns, universities are popping up. And one of the great classical authors of this era is Aristotle. And a lot of them begin to read his political works, where he talks a lot about the concept of tyranny and libertas. So tyranny, when you are ruled over by a dictator of sorts, a warlord, an emperor, a king. And libertas, when you have autonomy and freedom as a city. So the party of the Guelphs often call themselves the party of libertas. And if you walk around some of these old Italian cities today, you will sometimes see that word up on an old banner or etched into a building. And while all of this is going on, there's a new force that's beginning to emerge, and that is the force of il popolo. Il popolo is very hard to describe at times because we see the word people, and yes, it's people who are not necessarily the bankers or the super wealthy merchants or the noble magnates. Il popolo does begin to mirror the interests of a lot more people in the city. And Il Popolo is kind of like a wild card at times because often they feel they're left out of things. Once again, I'm here in Florence to try to understand how deeply these political factions really mattered to the average people. And how important was that term libertas? Was it like us, freedom? We're not going to have a dictator. We don't have tyrants. Or is it just something that sounds good in speeches? Now, folks, one of the things that we know about politics is how when you have political parties, every side is going to think that they're the most virtuous ones, that they are in the right, obviously. But they also have to have a way of kind of demonizing the other. When it comes to the Guelphs in Florence, what we kind of gather is that the Guelphs view themselves as pious. They're the merciful ones, the peaceful ones who don't want to fight. They're the ones that are communal, that believe in the concord of the commune. They believe in a more popular regime. They are not as elitist as the Ghibellines are. And they also have a specific reverence for the church. On the flip side, however, they look at the Ghibellines as being arrogant, rebellious, subversive, ferocious. So you could kind of convince me at the time, yeah, you are in the right and they are in the wrong. Now, as far as if you're a Ghibelline, how do you kind of justify yourself? Well, remember, a lot of it has to do with the nobility. So these nobles, they have the special blood. They can trace their bloodline back. They go back to the Crusades or to the days of Charlemagne or even farther. They are also following the legitimate emperor, the Holy Roman emperors who have ruled, and they can claim their descendancy back to the Roman emperors. So who are these upstarts who want to take away that power from them? And also, the church should stay out of politics. So they see things in a much different way. After some early successes by the Ghibellines, the Guelphs finally triumph in Florence. And once they kick out the Ghibellines, then the Guelphs in Florence begin to split into two factions. Guelphism begins to change. Because what we start to see is eventually the kings of France give up. They stop marching into Italy. They stop sending the dukes in. And then in 1375 to 1378, we have the War of the Eight Saints. And the War of the Eight Saints is essentially a war between Florence and the papacy. So if Guelphism is all about the party of the Pope, and Florence being kind of the heart of Guelphism, now it's fighting a war against the Pope. We start to see Florence kind of redefining Guelphism in some ways. We're talking about individuals including Colocchio Salutati, Leonardo Bruni. These are big authors and politicians that are going to come out of Florence. All of a sudden, libertas is not necessarily attached to having the Pope or the King of France helping it out. It's the actual republic itself, which is going to provide the libertas for its people. It's not an easy task because we're dealing with the 1300s. We don't have a lot of private journals and things like that, but we have a few of them. And it is important to note that Dino Campagni, he wrote during this time period, during the 1290s, early 1300s, at a time of very serious factional strife. He was an individual who was kind of like a first in his family. He didn't come from inherited wealth. He didn't get to where he was through a lot of connections, and he held some very important positions within the Florentine government before he got kicked out of politics. But I do want to share with you a couple paragraphs here. Arise, wicked citizens, full of discord. Grab sword and torch with your own hands and spread your wicked deeds. He's talking about the people who are fighting the factions. Unveil your iniquitous desires and your worst intentions. Why delay any longer? Go and reduce to ruins the beauty of your city. Spill the blood of your brothers. Strip yourselves of faith and love. Deny one another aid and support. Sow your lies. Even the justice of this world demands an eye for an eye. And look at your ancestors. Did they win through merit or discord? Yet now you sell the honors which they acquired. Do not delay, wretches. More is consumed in one day of war than is gained in many years of peace. A small spark can destroy a great realm. Whew. That's how he starts off book 2 of his chronicle. The second paragraph I want to share with you here. The citizens of Florence, divided like this, began to slander one another throughout the neighboring cities, spreading false information. And words falsely spoken did more damage to Florence than the points of swords. They worked on the Pope, telling him that the city would return to the hands of the Ghibellines and become a bastion for the Colonna. That was one of the rival families in Rome. So he promised to aid the Black Guelphs with the power of Charles of Valois. The Pope wrote that he wanted Messer Charles to make peace in Tuscany, opposing those who rebelled against the church. This commission of peacemaker had a very good name, but its purpose was just the opposite. Once again, Dino was writing as a political exile. He didn't get kicked out of the city like Dante, but he could never join into politics again, and he felt all he could do was tend to his business and to write. Dino is lamenting. He sees this fighting. He knows it doesn't have much to do with ideology anymore, especially now that the Ghibellines are gone. So one of the great insights I've gotten thus far is just how much false information can really, really destabilize a system that's a republic. And we're going to see a couple great examples of that in Florentine politics.